Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Still Can't Process It by Primary Most. Okay, so a little backstory here. Yesterday, my dad asked me to go with him to the hospital because he forgot some of his stuff in his office or whatever. It was around 10 p.m. My dad is an internist in a hospital, and the hospital has buildings for different departments. For example, one for heart diseases, one for lung issues, etc., etc. My dad wanted to speak to the head of the department. I don't know which department, though. Just a little chit-chat on basic stuff. But in order to reach him, we had to go through building J9 or something like that. And from J9, we had to go to the head of department, HOD. So we went into J9, which was basically an unfinished building that was abandoned. For now, I think. And it's in construction, I believe, or maybe will never be constructed. It's just its current state. We went in, and it was pitch black. My dad got his phone flashlight, and we walked and walked. And while walking in this pitch blackness, we saw a guy walking towards us. He looked Indian, kind of. He had a beard that was extremely long, and he had very long hair that was sitting upwards. On the two sides only, though. In the middle, there was no hair. The man was walking and just staring at us without saying a word. And my dad said, "Hey, can you turn the lights on in here?" My dad guessed he worked at the building and asked him to turn on the lights since it was pitch black. Since it was pitch black, and the man just stared and went into the elevator in the building. My dad looked confused, but he didn't say anything about it. We then went to the HOD and stayed up there for like 30 minutes because he and my dad were talking about random things. And after that, my dad wanted to go up to his office, or whatever it's called, and get the stuff that he forgot. And the fastest way to get there was through the elevator in J9, where the man we encountered went up. We pressed the button for the elevator, and it arrived, only to our surprise, the man we encountered was in the elevator 30 minutes after he had gone in the first time. And he was just there. We got in the elevator and pressed my dad's office floor. The man was just staring at me and my dad back and forth without speaking. I side-eyed my dad like, why is this dude staring at us like that? And suddenly, the elevator stopped working. My dad called the HOD and said, "Hey, the elevator stopped working on us." And the HOD said, "Well, just press the emergency button, it should work." And then my dad asked him, "Who's the guy working in J9? I talked to him and he hasn't said a word, and he's just sitting here staring at me and my son in the elevator right now." The HOD was confused and said, "No one works at J9. My dad just said, "All right," and he didn't say anything else. My dad told me to press the emergency button, and the dude was standing in front of the button, so I had to press that emergency button behind him, kind of. Lean my hands behind him and press the emergency button around him. Then the elevator started working, but the dude kept staring back and forth at me, then at my dad, and then at me again. My dad started waving to the dude and said, "Hey, you okay?" But the dude just continued staring back and forth at me, then my dad, and then me, then my dad. After 5 or so seconds, the elevator arrived at my dad's floor, and we got out of the elevator. The guy remained in the elevator. We got out to grab his mug and his laptop, which really took us like 10 seconds. We got back to the elevator to go down to my dad's car and go back home. And the elevator hadn't moved since we left it. When we pressed the button, the elevator obviously arrived right there. The doors opened, but the man wasn't there. I started freaking out on where he could be, and couldn't process how he wasn't in there. I mean, the elevator hadn't moved. I asked my dad where the guy went. He was confused and said, "I don't even know." We got in the elevator, went down, and got back to our car. But we didn't see that man again. Experience with a Crazy Person by Hexalilith. So, back in 2023, I, a 21-year-old female, had just gotten done picking up my mail from my parents' house when a friend of mine, let's call him Mark, who had been bugging me to hang out with him for a few months, got a hold of me. There had been other incidents that happened with Mark in the past, and some of them involving hardcore drugs, and using me to try to get some action. Those stories are for other times. But you could imagine I wasn't too keen on hanging out with him. But I finally caved since his place wasn't too far from my parents and it would finally get him to lay off. Against my better judgment, I drove over to Mark's apartment. Upon arriving, I texted him telling him that I was outside, and Mark came out to open the gate. We had to walk up 3 flights of stairs and a few doors down the hall to his apartment on the left. I should mention, Mark was short, like 5'3", so even I was taller than him. And he had some issues. His apartment was low income, but honestly rather nice and very clean. When you first walked in, on your left was a kitchen with a C shape, with a built-in sink facing the living room, separating the kitchen and the living room. Further in, there was a couch with a TV in front of it, and to the right was the bathroom, and further into the room and a door on the right was a single bedroom he shared with a roommate. I'll come back to him later. We sat on the couch and started talking about what we'd been up to, when Mark started to go on a rant about his roommate, how lazy and clingy and shitty he was, how he always wanted to cuddle and take their relationship further, and Mark only wanted the fun. He talked about how the roomie always missed the local bus for work, so Mark had to drive him around or something like that. Some of the details are a bit lost now. But at one point, Mark contacted one of his other friends to come over and help calm him down, I guess. Mark was getting more and more angry about his roommate, and I think he at one point was trying to text and call him, but his roomie wasn't answering, so Mark was getting even more and more angry, more and more loud, starting to get up and throw stuff around in the kitchen, saying that he wanted to break his roommate's stuff and beat him up, and possibly even kill him. I have really bad anxiety, especially when it comes to people being loud and aggressive, so I started to freeze up, not wanting to make myself a target for his violence. I really wanted to leave at that point, genuinely scared he'd try to hurt me. So I was trying to calm him down and de-escalate the situation from the couch in the living room. But he went into the bathroom and started throwing stuff around and destroying stuff in there. And then when the dumbass destroyed a glass bottle of what I think was mouthwash, he came out screaming in pain and anger. Turns out, when he destroyed it, the bottle of course broke and cut him deep in the palm. There was blood dripping all over the floor, and he was still screaming and shouting. So I got up and started trying to help him, and I finally calmed him down enough to look at his hand. I knew first aid all my life, and I also knew a Band-Aid wasn't going to help this. I asked him if he had and where his first aid kit was, ultimately knowing he would need stitches. I found it, and at this point, the kitchen and bathroom were in a shambles. I was just focusing on fixing up his hand enough till his friend got there, so I could leave, but I let him know that he would need to go to the hospital, and I would need to clean the wound before I could wrap it. So I pulled Mark over to the sink to try and wash the wound with warm water, and this is where things got bad again. He started crying and trying to pull his hand away. So I stupidly made a comment saying, "Look, if you're going to act like a fucking child, I'm not going to help you." That made him angry again. And he started yelling at me, got in my face and threatened me and scared me, really. And keep in mind, I mentioned this guy is 5'3" and I was wearing heels and around 5'8", so he was only coming up to my chin. I was petrified. I backed up into the living room away from him, and I searched blindly with one hand in my big bag that I had with me, and found what I was looking for. I palmed my knife, terrified at the thought of having to use it. The way Mark looked and sounded was just like my very abusive ex when he'd have episodes. I had already trauma dumped to Mark about my abusive ex in the past, so he knew all about it. As Mark was heading back to the kitchen away from me in the living room, I did one of the dumbest things in my life and said, "You look just like he did that night." The look Mark gave me was a look I had only seen once 3 years before, and it took everything I had not to scream or run or fight. Mark got in my face again, taunting me while I repeated over and over I just wanted to leave and to just please let me go. I thought he was going to beat me or hit me or, I don't know, something. Thankfully, he walked to the door and opened it and was telling me to get the fuck out. I went through the open door, and the whole time he was 3 inches behind me. Before we got to the stairs, I asked Mark to please go back into his apartment and to leave me alone. I was terrified of the thought of him pushing me down 3 flights of stairs. That's when he got a little closer and said, "If I wanted to kill you, I would." That statement sent chills down my spine and throughout my nerves. I just rushed down the stairs and out the gate while he watched from the apartment complex door. Once I got to my car, he turned and left. I got in and locked the doors, accidentally dropping my keys from my hasty entry. The next few minutes were panic-induced hell trying to find my keys. It was almost like a scene from a horror movie. I eventually had to leave the safety of my car to find my keys, thinking that I'd dropped them before I got in the car. Thank God, they were only under my seat. By that point, I was already a crying mess, sobbing. I was having a mini panic attack. And when I finally pulled away to leave, I swear I saw Mark and someone else standing on the balcony of his apartment watching me. Mark had picked me up from my place twice before, so he knew where I lived, and that thought alone was terrifying. When I eventually did make it home, I sent him a message calling him a monster. I told him I never wanted to see him again and that he was a liar and a shitty person. Then I blocked him and hoped that it was the end, and thankfully, it was. He did try a few times to reach out from a different account, but I was not going through that hell again. Shadow Person, Entity, Evil by Chronically Anxious. Okay, so I have an odd story. To me, it's pretty creepy, and I've thought about it over the years at random times throughout my life. This happened when I was a preteen. I grew up and still live in a relatively small town in Washington State, on the other side of the mountains from the coast. Our town is in a valley, and was very safe growing up. My mom had a longtime friend from high school, and she had a son my younger brother's age, and a daughter a year older than me. So we spent a lot of time together. I was a pretty quiet, introverted kid due to the environment I lived in, which is not relevant to the story, but the reason I never spoke about what happened until now. The girl's name was Heather. She was very outgoing and very much a bully. Looking back now, I realize it was her way of survival with the kind of mother she had. Her mom scared the shit out of me. Anyway, I would hang out with Heather even though I really didn't like to because she was mean. One of the things we would do, that I had done with several friends growing up, was sleep outside in the backyard without a tent, just in sleeping bags. It was definitely a different era then. No fences, and anyone could have seen us from the road. But there wasn't the thought that something bad could happen. It was summer, and we planned to sleep outside like we had many times before. But on this night, I just had an awful feeling that something wasn't right. An unsettling feeling. Nothing I could put my finger on. We talked and laughed, and then it got really late, so Heather started falling asleep. Her home was a duplex, one story with a carport on each side. You could see through the carports into the backyards easily. It was a residential area in town, so the mountains that surrounded our valley were several miles away. The backyard had bushes against a fence that then led to the backyards of the next street over's houses, and then a busy road beyond that street. Like I said, we had slept outside in her backyard many times before without anything ever happening. And like I said, that night I had a strange feeling. The kind of feeling you get when you feel you're being watched. I just lay there in my sleeping bag as Heather slept beside me. But I kept my eyes open, looking all around us as covertly as possible, trying to figure out why I felt so scared. I realized there wasn't any noise. No cars driving on the busy road 2 streets over, and it was like 10 o'clock on a Saturday night. There were no birds. The crickets stopped. It was just pure silence. I get goosebumps even now thinking about it. I can't explain the sickening feeling that suddenly came over me, if it was anxiety or something else. But then my ears started ringing, and it was this high-frequency noise mixed with TV static. It was painful, and as I was thinking about going inside to get my mom and figure out why my eyes were ringing and painful, Heather sat straight up. Her eyes were open, and she was breathing heavily. She moved so robotically, but fast. Her head turned all the way to the right to where I was lying, staring up at her with my eyes wide, and I realized the ringing had stopped, but there still were no other sounds. Heather was looking my way, but wasn't focused on me. It was like she was looking through me, and then she started talking. I thought she was mumbling, maybe talking in her sleep. And then it hit me that she was speaking some other language. My mom is white, my dad is Mexican, so I've grown up bilingual, and I knew she was speaking another language and not gibberish, but it wasn't anything I could put my finger on. She continued to get louder, and I swear everything got darker. The moon had been out with no clouds, so we could see fairly well. But all of a sudden, it was pitch black. And Heather continued speaking in this strange language. It was still silent around us, but something was moving out of the corner of my eye. I slowly turned my head away from Heather and saw a black shadow. No features, and still no noise. But this thing emerged from the ground in the yard next to us by the neighboring duplex. I knew it couldn't have been anyone from that house because there was just a young girl and her toddler and an older couple in that duplex. And I couldn't explain what I was seeing. It gradually got larger and was shaped like a cloaked figure moving very slowly towards us. I was frozen. My fight or flight didn't kick in. And all of a sudden, as I was watching this dark figure slowly creep over the grass coming towards us, it moved, fast, like a rush of black smoke, right into Heather. She immediately started screaming these unknown words and was shaking all over. And I shot up so fast and ran inside and woke up my mom screaming that something was wrong. Heather's mom heard me, and both of them came running outside. I stood at the back door watching in fear, and Heather was laying in her sleeping bag, sleeping soundly. I now could hear cars going by, the birds and crickets, all the normal nighttime sounds. The two moms looked at me like I was crazy and woke up Heather asking if she was okay. And she said yes, she was totally normal. And then they asked if I wanted to go back to sleep out there. But I refused and slept in the living room. Heather wouldn't come inside. The next morning we were supposed to go to church with her grandma, and her grandma picked us girls up and I sat in the back seat while Heather sat up front. She hadn't talked to me as we were getting ready and completely avoided me, which was weird because she was the kind of kid who needed to be around people, constantly talking and asserting herself. As her grandmother was saying that what time we would go back to our moms, I leaned up and asked Heather if she remembered anything from the night before. She said no, and I began explaining what had happened. The driver's side door was open, and I didn't see her grandma coming up. She did hear me asking Heather if she remembered anything and how she knew another language, when I'd known her my whole life and had never heard her speak anything but English. Her grandma asked me what happened, and immediately asked me what the language sounded like. So I went through what had happened, without telling her about the shadow or the strange painful ringing in my ears. Heather's grandma was super serious and took it all in. She didn't say anything else or ask any more questions, and we rode in silence to church for the most part, other than Heather telling me that I sounded crazy. We usually sat in the middle, my grandma's friends, but that day she made us sit in the first pew. She held Heather's hand the entire time, praying and crying. It was very out of the norm. And Heather was annoyed and embarrassed and kept trying to bring her hand away from her grandma. When church was finished, we walked back to the car and got in. Her grandma didn't start the car to leave and instead turned to Heather. I can't remember word for word what she said, but I remember her telling her that she had to go to church every Sunday and that she was going to have her stay with her for the rest of summer break, and she said that she would protect her. I think Heather was happy to get away because her mom was pretty abusive, but I knew her grandma wasn't talking about her mom. Heather's grandma then said that she had met something when she was very young, and it spoke a language that she had never heard before, but she knew what it was saying somehow. It offered her a way out of where she was, that she needed to agree and would be saved, but that she knew it wasn't God, that it was something dark, and that she would rather suffer and die than say yes. After that, I saw Heather less and less, and then my grandparents took me and my brother in. We lived in the same town, but hung around different groups of people, so I would see Heather at school sometimes, but that was it. Our moms remained in contact, and last year my mom mentioned that Heather's grandma had passed away. I said, "Oh, that's too bad. I barely remember her." And my mom mentioned that she had had a very hard life, and that she had been in a concentration camp when she was young. I knew that she was from Norway, but had never heard that. I put two and two together, and I believe whatever came for Heather that night was similar or the same thing that came for her grandma while she was in a concentration camp. And that night, those odd words were burned into my mind. I haven't heard anything remotely close to that strange language since. Still Glad I Listened to My Gut by CC5246. When I was a freshman in college, I used to sit in this sort of indoor break area between the library and computer lab while waiting for my classes. I didn't know a whole lot of people yet, and the student union was always loud, so I really liked that place to study and relax since there was hardly anyone there. One day, I was walking to the break area to wait for my next class, and I noticed a guy in his late 50s or early 60s close behind me. I held the door open for him, and he said thank you, and I just nodded and went to one of the couches. And he followed me and kind of blocked me in between the couches and the door, and began a conversation. It was pretty normal at first, just, oh, it's nice to see young people who are respectful type of bullshit. I'm not very confrontational, so I didn't know how to stop the conversation. I was just looking at my phone and trying to end the conversation with, haha, yeah, well, it was nice talking to you. The guy didn't get the hint. Then it took a weird turn. He asked if I was Latina, and I said yes, and he said, yeah, I can tell because Latina women either have huge tits or a fat ass, but never both. I just looked up from my phone and said, excuse me? And then he started rambling about how sexy Latina women were, and other explicit comments. So I cut him off and said, I'm sorry, I need to go. I forgot I have work today. I grabbed my bag that I didn't even unpack, pushed past him, and he started to follow me as I began walking out of the break area. He asked where I worked, and I told him, I'm super far away, so I need to go. But he kept insisting that I tell him where I worked, and that he could walk me to my car. I told him no and started to pick up the pace, but he kept following me, keeping pace, saying, pretty young ladies shouldn't walk alone. I finally yelled, leave me alone, and ran into the library. I went inside and looked through the glass doors, and this dude was waiting by the doors. He seriously was standing there trying to look in and see where I was, but he wouldn't come in through the doors, which was weird. Then the librarian at the info desk asked if I was okay, and I broke down. I apologized for my overreacting, but she reassured me and called campus police. She let me sit behind the desk, and then we saw the guy take off. I was too scared to leave, though. And finally, campus security came, and I gave them a description of the guy. They had me wait in the library, and after about 10 or so minutes, the campus police said that they think they found the dude in the parking lot. They took me on their golf cart, and we parked behind a wall so I wouldn't have to confront this guy, but I could still ID him. And sure enough, it was him. They took him away and then escorted me to my car. A couple of days later, I was called to the Title IX office for a follow-up. They asked me for details and then told me that the campus police had found him walking in between cars and looking into them. When they apprehended him, they scanned his driver's license, and it turned out this dude had already been banned from campus because he had already harassed 4 other women. He hadn't even been a student at any point at that school. The dude would literally show up and creep on women and try to follow them to their cars or get them to leave with him. Thankfully, every single one of us found police or faculty to help us before anything escalated. To this day, over 10 years now, I still think about how if I hadn't listened to my gut, even though I thought I might have been overreacting, what could have happened. I pray that he never successfully attacked or kidnapped someone. Unfortunately, I don't remember the guy's name, so I can't look him up. Stay safe, y'all, and always listen to your gut. Always close your portals, kids. Submitted by Psyduck Lava. The story I'm about to share is not one event, but a collection of events in a townhouse I shared with my friend. It was October of 2016 in northern Kentucky. I'd had a falling out with my previous best friend whom I'd shared the townhouse with, and suddenly had to fill the vacancy to be able to afford the rental. This resulted in my newly acquainted friend from work taking over the other half of the lease. I hadn't known Cooper long, but I had no other options, and we seemed to get along really well. I went to his grandmother's house to help him pick up his things for the move. And the house felt cold and strange. Just the atmosphere felt off. Her dining room was covered in angel dolls from wall to wall, and downstairs where Cooper stayed there was an impressive crystal ball on a table covered in copious amounts of crystals. Apparently his grandmother was a psychic, She talked of shadow people and the other world as if they were her neighbors. Out of nowhere, she offered to read my palm, and reluctantly I gave my palm to her. I was a practicing pagan and believed in the paranormal, but was skeptic of a lot of things too. She mentioned details of my life that she had no way of knowing, nor did Cooper. The whole thing was spooky, and I was a bit spooked, and we left shortly after. We'd invited a few friends over to help with the move and then hang out afterward. In Cooper's bedroom, which I never entered when my previous roommate was there, I felt drawn to the closet, and I kept retreating from our laughing friend group and sitting in there looking at it. They hadn't noticed that I was doing that for a bit, and everyone went outside to retrieve more boxes. I turned the light off in the closet and sat in there with the door shut. For some reason, it felt safe and soothing. Embarrassed to admit, I'm sort of afraid of the dark and small places, so this was completely out of character for me. When my friends came back upstairs, they noticed and convinced me to leave the closet door to get dinner. The following week, Cooper admitted to having a nightmare almost nightly that had this dark figure in his closet with a huge toothy grin staring at him. We didn't think much of it after that. And then came Halloween. As I mentioned, I'm a practicing pagan, and I felt compelled to do some spell work in honor of Samhain. I did this spell that was more of a thanks and love to ancestors and past loved ones. But now I believe something had gone wrong, and I opened up a portal. Things started kicking off in the house quickly after that. And even starting that night, we went to a Halloween party and returned to the house late, and I was drunk, of course. I went to use the downstairs bathroom, and I don't recall all the details because I was drunk, but my friend was not. Evidently, I was saying Bloody Mary in the mirror and talking to someone in the corner who I described as a woman in a gray dress. When I was taking a while and Cooper could hear me talking to someone, he tried to open the door that didn't have a lock, but sure was stuck. Finally, after getting it open, he found me still talking to someone unseen in the corner as I sat there in the complete dark. Shortly after that, we both came home from work one day at the same time to discover my goddess pendant that hung around my bedroom doorknob for protection had been cut clean off, as if with a knife. That same week, Cooper always thought I was home when I wasn't on more than one occasion, and during those times he saw a woman with dark long hair move from the bathroom to my bedroom. Almost daily, I felt like someone was always right behind me in the kitchen walking with my every step. And then after that, we went upstairs once to see his door partially open, and I saw a white head with glowing eyes drop down from his ceiling. By the drained color of Cooper's face, he had seen it too. We noped out of there and went to stay somewhere else that night, but the final event before we really tried to leave started with us one night, sitting in the living room. Cooper's dog was acting strange and had run upstairs, so Cooper went to check on him. But he didn't come down for a really long time, so I went up. The door to his room was barricaded or something. I struggled to get in. When I finally pushed the door open, Cooper's dog bolted out, looking spooked as all hell. When I looked in, Cooper was sitting in the middle of his room in a daze and mumbling. I didn't understand what was going on, but was trying to get him to snap out of whatever he was in. That's when he suddenly looked behind me with fearful eyes and told me that I had to leave right then. Behind me, over my shoulder, was the closet. Trying to rationalize that he was just being ridiculous, I went down to drag him up to his feet, and he reluctantly started to come. That's when I felt a searing pain on my arm, but I ignored it, and I was still trying to convince myself that this was all in my head. This couldn't be real. I grabbed Cooper's arm and started walking out of the room, convinced that he'd be fine after we left. But it felt like multiple people were pulling us back towards the closet as I walked. It was taking every ounce of energy in me to get Cooper to move. Finally, we got out of the room into the hallway, and I yanked the door shut. As we started to head downstairs, Cooper started to gain more and more awareness and wasn't as confused. That's when I looked down to see 3 red scratch marks on my arm. I don't know what was in that closet, and I don't know if I'm totally to blame for it, but I've lived a lot of my life thinking that I am to blame. Shortly after this, we got out of our lease and we left the townhouse. I haven't had nearly as much paranormal encounters as I had back then, which I'm thankful for. And all I can say now is, kids, close your portals. Tapping at My Window by Bigfoot Watches You. Many years ago, I had to take my wife to work at 5 a.m., and I didn't have to work until 9. So I dropped her off and drove back towards home and into the mountains on public land where I had a stand. It was still a good bit before daylight when I parked, so I thought I'd take a nap and walk in about 10 minutes before daylight hunt, till I had to get ready for work. I kicked the seat back and propped my leg up and drifted off. I woke to a feverish tapping on my driver's side window. Tap, 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 tap. And all I could imagine was some Blair Witch bony-fingered demon of the woods tapping at my window, and it looked like my soul was doomed. I fired my F-250 up, put it in gear, and took off without looking at what it was. I drove back to the highway and to a different piece of woods as daylight approached and hunted there, still wondering what I had just heard. I got back to the truck and pulled out onto the highway after an unsuccessful hunt. And at some point in the daylight then, I looked at my driver's side mirror, and that's when I saw it. My mirror adjusted all the way to one side. I was the demon all along, with my leg having hit the power mirror switch, and the tapping was the sound of the mirror motor maxed out. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, email it to unclejosh.truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're catching this episode on YouTube and you like what you've heard, do me a favor and give it a thumbs up, and leave a comment below and let me know what you thought of the stories. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. If you're not subscribed already, why not subscribe? Hit the notification bell for every time I upload, and maybe even tell a friend about the channel. I sure would appreciate it. Follow me on social media, and if you'd like to take your support of the channel a step further, find a link to my Patreon page in the description, and consider purchasing some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. There's a link to my storefront at tpublic.com down there too. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.